Well, as of right now, it appears Democrats will come up short of the 4 votes needed from Senate Republicans to compel new witness testimony. Here's where the key swing votes stand. Last night, Lamar Alexander of Tennessee confirmed he will vote against calling witnesses. We're going to get to his statement in a moment where he says it happened, but I don't care. Lisa Murkowski says she'll announce her decision this morning, leaving Susan Collins and Mitt Romney as the only Republicans who have committed to voting for more witnesses and documents. If Murkowski decides to join them and all other senators vote along party lines, the final tally will be 50 votes for new evidence and 50 votes against. Under any circumstances, the vice president could cast the tie-breaking vote. But because of the obvious conflict of interest, it is the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court who presides over presidential impeachment trials. And those who've studied John Roberts says he is unlikely to intervene. And more on Senator Lamar Alexander's decision. In a statement released after last night's question and answer session, the senator wrote in part this: "There is no need for more evidence to prove that the president asked Ukraine to investigate Joe Biden and his son Hunter." He said this on television October 3rd, 2019, and during his July 25th, 2019 telephone call with the president of Ukraine. There is no need for more evidence to conclude that the president withheld United States aid, at least in part, to pressure Ukraine to investigate the Bidens. The House managers have proved this with what they call a mountain of overwhelming evidence. Alexander then writes this: "It was inappropriate for the president to ask a foreign leader to investigate his political opponent and to withhold United States aid to encourage that investigation. When elected officials inappropriately interfere with such investigations, it undermines the principle of equal justice under the law. But the Constitution does not give the Senate the power to remove the president from office and ban him from this year's ballot simply for actions that are inappropriate." The question then is not whether the president did it, but whether the United States Senate or the American people should decide what to do about what he did. I believe that the Constitution provides that the people should make that decision in the presidential election that begins in Iowa on Monday.
So Gene Robinson, Lamar Alexander determined the president is guilty of the charges.
Quite a statement.
Admitted that the Democrats, the House managers, proved their case with a mountain of evidence. Said, "I don't want any more information." He said, "I will vote to acquit." Now, listen, John Meacham and I have talked for some time that you can make the argument that I think the president is guilty of the charges, but it's not an impeachable offense. The problem with Lamar Alexander's argument is, and the flaw of it is, that he actually makes a determination of the seriousness of what the president did. And he said it was, quote, simply inappropriate. Well, he can't make that determination of whether it was simply inappropriate or not until he hears what the key witness has to say about the drug deal that went down inside the White House.
Exactly.
So it seems to me, if he's calling it simply, quote, inappropriate, well, he actually needs all the evidence before him before he makes that determination, doesn't he?
Yeah, of course he needs to know what Donald Trump said to John Bolton, what other documentary evidence or notes John Bolton might have as to what was really going on. As you know, you're a lawyer, you get a witness on the stand who has firsthand knowledge, and you will learn more about the crime. And in this case, you will learn more than Lamar Alexander wants to learn. He just doesn't want to know how much worse this was than we already know. Remember, the Democrats did have to prove their case, yes, largely with secondhand witnesses, because the president kept primary witnesses from testifying and or providing any documents, provided no documents at all. John Bolton knows where the bodies are buried in this case, and Republicans don't want to hear it. Now, am I surprised? No, I'm not surprised that it's working out this way. And what it does is make the election in November that much more important. I mean, it's not just important that Donald Trump be defeated. It's important that the Republican Party, which is a decadent party, which is a Trumpist party, which is not the Republican Party that you joined years ago, and that I recall from 5 years ago. It's not the Republican Party that we knew. It just needs to be removed from positions of authority and power.
And by the way, I'm glad you said that, because a lot of people are saying, oh, well, this is the Republican Party. This is what the Republican Party's always been. No, it's not. I mean, you look at the record deficits, you look at record debt. When I was there, we balanced the budget 4 years in a row. We did a lot of good things that we promised to do. The deficits, the debt, the reckless spending, the radicalism. I mean, it has reached a fevered pitch under Donald Trump. There's nothing about this party, Willie, that is what it once was. This was actually the party with the former chairman of the Judiciary Committee, Chuck Grassley, that actually talked about the importance of whistleblowers, the importance to drain the swamp by having whistleblowers in the federal government be able to come forward and call out corruption in the federal government and be protected. Thanks for checking out MSNBC on YouTube, and make sure you subscribe to stay up to date on the day's biggest stories. And you can click on any of the videos around us to watch more from Morning Joe and MSNBC. Thanks so much for watching.